Welcome to the Lazy Millennial Lounge. We have King Williams here. King, thank you so much for being with us today.
Now, thank you for having me today.
I would love it if you could set the stage for us. Tell us what King Williams thought he was going to be doing with his life around the time you graduated from high school and how that compares to what's actually going on in your life right now.
Compared to other people, I kind of already knew what I wanted to do with my life.
Oh, that's
Um,
beautiful.
I want to know for a while. The thing is, I'm doing it now, and it's taken a while to get to this space, but I always knew since I was a little boy when I saw like Disney, like 90s kids Disney movies, that I wanted to be in film. So I've kind of known since I was a little boy, and so that's what I'm in now. How I got here really specifically was it's really two paths. So it depends on how you know me, right? So most people know me from one or two paths. They either know me from the filmmaking side of it, or they know me from the journalism side. And so the filmmaking is what brought about the journalism aspect of it. And I got into filmmaking honestly because of really one thing in particular. I used Twitter to get an internship with Spike Lee, and this was about 2011. I remember when it happened. I was sitting in the Georgia State. They don't even call it that anymore, so I don't know what they call it now. But it used to be called, this is 2011, so it was called the Georgia State University's Digital Aquarium. It was a place where students who are at the university who didn't get into the film program or weren't a part of the film program for whatever reason, they could use computers. And so me and one of my buddies, she was in the lounge with me. And so she dropped out of school to work in political campaigns. And she saw that Spike Lee was on Twitter. And it was his first time on Twitter. His very first tweet was, hey, if you're looking for internships, hit up my man Jason. And so Jason is still Spike's assistant to this day. Jason in particular, he put out Jason's real email address. And so she took that, she wrote it down, and then she was like, hey, listen, I know you've been working on films of your own, because that's what I was doing before that. She was like, hey, I know you've been working on films for your own for a while. You've been working on this documentary for a while, called The Atlanta Way. It was about gentrification in Atlanta, and I would do short films and volunteer film festival. And I was just really, really doing anything I could to get to be in the film industry.
Mhm.
And so she was just like, how about I make you, you'll be my first like real political campaign. And so she built a campaign for me to be his intern, and it took a few months, but by late April, we had developed a campaign that was essentially like telling people who I was. So they'll tell me all the good qualities I had. I'm a hard worker. I'm a good student. I am, I'm trustworthy. I'm timely, all of these things. And so I never said anything to Spike, but for like 3 months or so, people were just telling people how good of a person I was to Spike, and I should be his intern. Spike actually wasn't looking for interns, and that tweet was something that he thought he was replying to somebody like as a direct message,
Mm.
but it went public. And so at that point, by the end of April, I think he had so many calls coming in daily to his office that his office could not make outgoing business calls. And so they got my number. At that point, they got my number. And then from there, they just talked to me for a while. And I thought the guy was going to fire me, or like, I was like, I can't get fired. I don't have a job yet. And so, or they were going to call the police or something. I was like, I hope it's not harassment, but I'm like, they're in New York. I'm in Atlanta. I don't know how this works. But he talked to me for a while. And then Jason, his assistant, was like, what? I think you're a good dude. And please don't ever do this again. But like, we're not really looking for interns right now. So I was like, you know what? All right, cool. Thanks. And so I didn't think nothing of it. 2 months later, because my birthday's in June, so that's how I know this happened. It was about a week after my birthday, and I get a call from a New York number, and I was like, I know who this is. And so he was like, hey, Spike wants you to, come to New York because we're looking for some people to help be interns for the summer. And I was like, he's like, can you get here tomorrow? Mind you, this was like a Wednesday afternoon, right? And I was like, no, I live in Atlanta. I work at FedEx. Like, I just can't like get up and leave. I was like, seriously, can you give me a week? He's like, I don't know, man. I was like, seriously, can you just give me a week? And so the very next week, like that following Thursday, I'm packing my bags. I've sold everything I have. My aunt raised a little bit of money for me and my parents. They got me a one-way ticket to New York City. And then at that point, I get to New York City, my first day there. I'm staying with my cousin Keisha. She picks me up. She takes me to the Bronx. It's my first time ever going to the Bronx. It's my first time ever being in New York. And so from that point on, I just hit the ground running in New York. And so at that point, people just got a rep for me, being like, okay, this guy, King Williams, he's a really good worker. He's from Atlanta. I've never seen anybody work as hard as him. And so that rep is what eventually Spike just kind of kept me on as his assistant. And from that point, I kept getting more and more film and television jobs in New York. And that was doing good for a while. I'm not gonna lie, it was doing really good. Um, I made more money than I ever could have, but then something was telling me to come back home. And
Mm.
so I was doing that. I was kind of feeling unfulfilled. I felt like my career wasn't going where I wanted to. Like I said before, I worked in documentaries. I'm working on my own stuff beforehand. And so little did I know that I was supposed to be coming back home, because I remember this to this day. I remember I wasn't getting any film work, and I had a buddy of mine living in my apartment in New York to kind of just take care of my rent. And I was going back and forth to other places trying to get work, because when you work in film, you're always hustling. Like, people don't understand this. Like, whether you're Will Smith or whoever, when that project's over, like, that money is done. So you got to go to the next thing. I just wasn't getting work. I wasn't getting love. And it was just like, you know what, let me move back home. And I remember my mom came up. It was her only time ever visiting me in New York. And on Christmas Day, I remember this. She hung out with me, one of my best friends, one of the best memories of my life. And so then I moved back. And then 3 weeks later, I thought I was going to stay in Atlanta for like a month, get an apartment, just, get going, try to work in film. And then my aunt had a series of massive strokes. And so then I've been her caretaker ever since then. But in the process, I've had to readjust how I live, how I operate, how I work. And so I just started working with I worked with a nonprofit called Leadership DeKalb, and that exposed me to a lot of people in DeKalb County, like politicos, like
Mhm.
of all types. And so what that ended up leading me to was a job. This lady was like, "Hey, you have a really good voice. I know this other woman named Maria Supporter who works with the Atlanta Business Chronicle." And for most people, when you're a journalist, you have to have like years of experience, go to journalism school, work your way up from small papers. And they were just like, "Listen, we know what you've done with Spike. And also during that time, I want to state too, I had done plenty of like speaking engagements. I was always doing speaking engagements at different schools across the country. I did a TED talk. I did some like work with Harvard's School of Government on how to deal with gentrification. So people knew what I was doing. And I had only written one thing. It was for Harvard. It was just one article. It was about called like the crisis of leadership regarding like gentrification or something. And she was just like, "Listen, I like your voice. I like your ideas. We should talk." And then she didn't say anything for a full year. At that point, she comes back the very next year. She's like, "Hey, we have a long 2-hour lunch." She's like, "Hey, would you want to work with us? I know you're not a journalist. I know you're not a writer, but I really enjoy your voice. And we have somebody leaving." That same person who gave me the job got me the internship in New York in the first place, she was leaving that position. And so serendipitously, like, she's the reason why I went to New York, and she's also the reason why I got the journalism job. And from then on, I just kind of hit the ground running with journalism again. And so over the last 18, 20 months now, more people know me now from journalism than they do for all of my time working in film or
Mhm.
documentaries.
All right, so that's like how you started out in filmmaking and then transitioned into journalism.
Mhm.
How did you get how did your area of expertise or focus become gentrification, urbanism? Like, where did that come from?
Just honestly, my mom.
Okay.
So I grew up I tell people all the time, one of the roads I grew up on as a little kid was this place called Candler Road in Atlanta. And so I would take that trek from downtown Decatur all the way back down Candler Road where we used to live at. And so as a kid, I would see different things, and I would ask questions like to my mom, annoying her, like, "What happened to this? Where did this go?" I didn't realize that was eventually going to be like what I would major in college necessarily.
Mhm.
But um, I always had that question about, like, how do cities work? How do people work? How do we react to the environment? Because that's how I grew up. I grew up around a lot of people, and my family, they grew up around a lot of people. They grew up in cities. So I noticed in Decatur, in particular, there's two places called East Lake Meadows, which is a housing project that was getting torn down. And at the time, I was too young to realize what East Lake Meadows, like, I didn't understand the process of like somebody tearing down public housing. I just knew there's a place that people lived at, and all of a sudden they didn't live there anymore. And I knew that something had happened, right? I couldn't put two and two together. I was too young. But I knew
Like,
about
how
East.
old were you around that time?
I spent
Ish.
most of, I mean, the road I grew up on, I think I was probably like, I didn't move to like 12 or 13. So
Okay.
like, I mean, but East Lake was probably gone when I was like, I don't know how I was like 10 or 11. And then like in downtown Decatur also, because I think people forget this now, downtown Decatur is very nice. It's very lovely. I'm probably going to go after this interview, maybe take a late night walk. It's a very nice place to be at, but it wasn't always like that. I remember when it was just like graffiti and Burger King and people being afraid of homeless people there. I remember what that was like. And I remember like the process of it changing around. And so that kind of got me going. And then it wasn't until college I actually found real answers on those questions.
So you were focusing in filmmaking. Were you also were you just taking other classes that were related to urbanism, urban policy planning, stuff like that? Or were you like
Uh,
doing your own research on the side?
that's a good question. So to be honest, I actually I started out in film and I made C's and D's, and I couldn't go on into the film program. And so I didn't do well my first year. And so I'm coming back, sophomore year. The very first class I took was like an African American studies class. And then that was just like, oh, I knew a lot. My parents knew a lot. They read a lot. They took us all to museum stuff, but it was like my mind being blown. And then that just took me into a whole nother direction. And then I learned a lot about Atlanta. And then I started to be able to piece together things I was understanding with
Hmm.
Atlanta. And then I didn't know this, but African American Studies is mostly like a history based course. So you get a chance to take others. And that put me in the urban policy class. And I was like, oh, I started to put two and two together. So when you see me tweet and write, it's because literally those teachers, that knowledge, those books they gave me, I still keep. Like I got to see how those two and two things work together. So that's kind of how urbanism and all of that kind of happened.
That's cool. So as you were learning about it, you were able to connect the dots and like figure out like what that big picture looks like.
Yeah, because I don't know what undergrad did you go to?
Emory down the street.
Okay. Oh
Hmm.
yeah. So I don't know how they do at Emory though, but at Georgia State, particularly for their urban policy majors, or like they, in particular, like they make you have to do something, right? So
Hmm.
African American Studies, urban policy, like the arts and humanities, you literally have to either get an internship, work somewhere, you have to do something that's actually outside of the school.
Gotcha.
And so for African American Studies, sometimes they knew that, so they would literally just take the students out of class. Like so, a lot of our class would just be walking through the city, like walking downtown, getting up, taking Marta somewhere. So like we all had like this real understanding like the world is a real place. And so like
Hmm.
that's kind of I still do this today. I do it on Instagram Live now, but I got that from college. And so
Cool. I like
yeah.
that. Yeah, I don't even know if we had an urban planning major, but
Oh
also
wow.
I don't know if that was something that they did, but that's pretty cool. Let's talk about the documentary, The Atlanta Way. How did that come about? Like, was that a direct result of your freshman year when you were doing the filmmaking courses, or later on once you started connecting dots? How did you like get the desire to do that, and what was your goal with it?
So I've always had the idea of doing a documentary since I was young. My last semester, Georgia State, I put out like something on Facebook then, like Instagram wasn't alive yet. I just put it out like, hey, I want to do a documentary. It's like my last semester. Does anybody would meet up with me? If you do, meet me in the cafeteria. And then this one dude I played basketball with, this guy named Zettler, and then like five or six other people, they showed up and they were just like, hey, we think this is cool. And so we just had no real idea, no real understanding. We borrowed equipment from that same digital aquarium lab I was telling you about. We just started filming public housing projects. And so within a month, we had like 60 interviews of people. And we just started like doing little shorts, putting little interviews up on like YouTube and Facebook and all that stuff. And then it just kind of built from there for a few years. And so that was really fun. So it was like, that was cool. Like, I got a chance to do that and that was fun. And so that's kind of how the documentary was initially going. And
Hmm.
then I got to a point, as I just be honest, like people don't talk, since I didn't know what I was doing, you get to a certain point where you don't know how to finish your product. And then the other thing is, in the case of what we were doing a documentary, we didn't have enough footage to like complete a project. So it was always these shorts. So it would be like if me and you were talking, but let's say I was in an interview and you just saw you talking to some magical person, right? It would be kind of like that. So there'd be like 50% of the footage just wasn't usable.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of how all that happened.
Got you. So the TED Talk that you did, was that prior to the documentary like being completed or some version of complete?
That was after. That was like I was definitely living in New York at that point in time.
Oh, okay.
But the thing was, all those shorts I was telling you about and like the little trailers that we put up online, people kept seeing them. Like people just
Hmm.
like hit me up, and that would get me to go talk to schools because it would literally be like I'd be working in New York, and like this actually did happen. Like the Alabama School of Journalism, like, hey man, would you be interested to come in like on Tuesday and Thursday this week? And in film, people don't notice, but you can't really call off. So I would be like, shit, I might have to quit this job or see if they'll let me off for one day, or if they let me off, they might just like the person. I was like, I'm willing to take that risk. So I would just keep doing that across the country though. And so, it was a little bit frustrating, but it was like my career is moving more in that space anyway. So
Yeah.
that just kind of kept happening.
Now I think that's a testament to the like attraction and the power of information, because like even though the documentary wasn't maybe what you had envisioned like as a
Yeah.
complete project, there was still bits and pieces that you could use to share information with other people who were interested in it. Like earlier today, I was watching the TED Talk, and then I watched a few of the, I think it was like a 30-minute thing that y'all put out that was
Yeah.
like a before the documentary type thing. And I mean, I learned so much just from that, like regardless of whether this is the final documentary or not. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. And actually that time of doing the documentary, a lot of stuff that I guess we're gonna be talking about in a second about content and delivery. I was talking about that then, but like I'm at dealing with people at Georgia State, people like, what the fuck are you? I mean, sorry, what are you talking about? Like I was like, no, no, trust me. Like a lot of stuff I was talking about, I felt like I was talking like pig Latin to people, but I was like, I
Yeah.
kind of got to see then. I was like, oh, okay, I see where this is going.
Well, talk
Yeah.
more about that, because I imagine that's very different from now when everybody's very like aware and attuned to the
Yeah.
content.
So all right, so this is a good point. So like when you first probably saw that 30-minute clip, that came out in 2011. That was like right when I told you like I was at the Georgia State Aquarium every day and stuff like that, the digital aquarium every day. But I knew then, I saw how we delivered. One of my homeboys, he had also, I'm around a lot of dropouts, but he had
Okay.
also dropped out of school around that time too. And he was like, all right, you got this 34-minute clip. We got all these other trailers. I'm going to put together a plan and I'm going to go on Twitter and I'm going to show people how to start watching your documentary. Right. And so he built a little campaign over like 12 hours to get awareness about the project that we didn't have before. And then he would also be on Facebook utilizing old clips we do to get new ideas. And I was like, oh, I see how this was going. And the thing I learned from that was like, content on the internet is very, do you want to talk a lot about content? Because I feel like this might get into a real content-y kind of
Let's
conversation.
go. Come on.
All right. All right. So what I learned then was like, I learned that it's important to have uniformed information. And one thing I didn't realize, 'cause I'm making a documentary, right? I understood the documentary is about gentrification. And while that is cool, I learned that no matter what the medium is, the information needs to be relatively like consistent, even though it's delivered differently. So like Twitter is like basically the highway. It's always new, always updating. You got to jump in, either going in the slow lane or the fast lane, but you got to go one or two speeds, right? Facebook is kind of like you going to Walmart, like you're just in there, you're lost. Anybody can show up, anything can show up. And so you might hear, there might be something that's super big on one part of Facebook that's not big in another part. And then the information that's in like a Walmart, let's say, like, let's say you're looking for like bath towels, may not be the best bath towel that's available. It's just what's like the biggest at Walmart. And so for me, I realized early on, like, all right, cool. So like the social media marketing is going to be about respecting the platforms, which means you need to probably spend more time on social media than you probably spend in like a traditional campaign. The other thing I learned is like when delivering content, you need to make sure that you're constantly churning out new stuff, because even though the Facebook and the Reddits of the social media age are picking up stuff, your players who are on Facebook, I mean, then like Facebook and now Pinterest and all these other places, they're not going to get that. Right. And then YouTube is like its own individual animal. So like the content now, you have to essentially be ubiquitous. And so I realized then it's like, all right, the people who are going to do well on the internet are people who have constant stuff out all the time, everywhere. And like nobody was like really understanding. I was like, no, you need to have a lot of videos, a lot of this, a lot of that, and just keep doing it, because that was going to be like how you actually got big. And we kind of see this now.
So at that point in time, did you have like an idea of one or two that you wanted to exert most of your energy in, or was it just like we everywhere 24/7?
For me, it was like I knew Twitter is what, and it's still to this day, I still make this argument. Twitter is the most important thing on the internet outside of like the actual connection itself, right? Like Facebook's got a bunch of users, WhatsApp, TikTok, they all got users. If you can get good at Twitter, you can be the president of the United States. And like, I'm not even making this up. Like, we kind of see where this is going now, because of what it is. So for me, it was like, all right, I need to be with YouTube. I need to be with Twitter. If I were to do it over again, I would just have a strategy, like kind of like a rapper, where I would just continually be like distributing stuff daily, almost to like the point. But for me, content is like, you got to master Twitter, you got to master YouTube, because if you can master those two things, all the other social media platforms come in. I think podcasts are legitimately like the third horseman of content outside of like video and social.
So for you, right now, like, do you have a goal in mind with your presence on social media? Like, it's like, okay, I'm trying to do X thing, so I'm going to be on social media, talking about this or promoting this, or is it just kind of like organically building connections with the people who are interested in what you're talking about on social?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I came into this year. Anybody who knows me knows I actually had a plan. I was working on my documentary for a while, and another documentary I worked on called East Lake Meadows already came out on PBS. So at the end of last year, I had already had a plan. All right, this is my marketing plan. I'm going to release the Atlanta way. It's going to be this. We're going to do this. It's independent. We're almost done. We're going to market this. I think it was like the second or third day into the new year when we saw like we almost got into like that war with Iran. I was like, you know what? we need to start thinking about this. And
Mhm.
so what I have done is I've done something different. I realized early on, my initial plan was, all right, I'm going to release my Atlanta Way documentary finally. I'm going to release a short, like kind of like I did before, like a short film every Friday for like 20 weeks. And then I was like, that's just not going to work. And so a lot of people who are around me, like, whatever you want to do, we're here for you, do that. What I really started to do is say, I was like, I'm not going to do any marketing. I'm actually going to try to build connections. And so for the entire first month of January, I put out a tweet saying, hey, I want to meet people for coffee. And that's kind of how I met you. So I've been meeting just new people, every single person, every single day for the month of January. That spilled over into February and into March. And I think I saw somebody literally every single day with the exception of 2 days in January, 1 day in February, and every day until right when we had the ban for COVID in March. So I basically saw like probably like 100 and something new people. And
That's
like that
cool.
doesn't scale, that doesn't get you likes, but it was like I met you and now I'm on the podcast, right?
Mhm.
That's not a content strategy, but it was like my plan was initially just to put out a product. I knew the product it's like old, so people need to know it. And I thought that was the idea. Now my thing is like no marketing for a while. Let me just start talking and connecting to people. I didn't realize that would be the thing that has helped me a lot this year
Mhm.
because every one of those 100 people have turned to be some type of value to me, and hopefully I can be a value to them.
Yeah.
So
I thought that was so cool when I saw this. I don't even know how
yeah.
I saw it because I didn't know you, so I wasn't
Yeah,
following you.
yeah.
I think maybe just somebody, on Twitter, somebody likes it and you can see that they like this other person's thing. And I was like, that's pretty dope. You mentioned podcast. I wanted to ask about your podcast. Is the Neighborhood Watch? Is that what it's
Yes.
called? And the newsletter, if I understand, are both like kind of related to the documentary. How does that all work together?
All right, let's say the 4 aces of content. So I think this is my opinion. I think social is one, YouTube is the second, third I think is podcasting, fourth I think is good old fashioned email. And so one of the things was like I said myself this year, I'm going to do good in those 4 particular mediums because that's where it's going. And so like the Atlanta Way, I had this idea. All right, I do have some more professionally polished podcasts that I was going to put out. And then COVID hit, right? And so then I was like, I'm going to go very lo-fi. I'm going to get on Zoom. I'm going to talk to business owners, nonprofits, everyday people who've been affected. So I've done a series called COVID Conversations now. Instead of like the regular podcast when everybody's like, trying to either hang out with their friends in the podcast space or they're just trying to like shoot the shit with people. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
nah, I want to talk to people who are really like, yeah, like for real. Like, and that's cool.
No,
Like
I
me and you were
know. Yeah.
talking. Yeah. Like, but it's one thing. Um, but it's another thing when you're trying to like develop out a real content strategy. And so for a lot of people, I think one of the things we don't talk about is, I don't know if you talked about this in the show yet, but podcast listenership for the year has went down as a result of COVID, same as music listenership, right?
Yep.
The things that have went up is escapism. So people on video games, people buying alcohol, people watching movies, reading books, the
Mm-hmm.
things that people can escape from. And I realized, all right, if people are going to listen to a podcast, especially with me, they don't fully know me. I need to go, instead of listening to me, I need for people to listen to new people. So my podcast is actually about showcasing other people in either their stories or their struggles.
Gotcha.
And I want to keep it as lo-fi, low produce as possible so that people, they can just kind of jump in without having to feel like they have a long commitment. So each one of the episodes is like 20 to 25 minutes. And so now I'm starting to get into longer form episodes now, but it's only because I've been developing out this relationship. And the newsletter of it, they relate together. So the newsletter I have, I'm actually putting out an issue tonight after we talk. But the newsletter is this. I realized in the news space, I didn't know COVID was going to hit. I didn't know we were going to have a pandemic and all of this stuff. Not the pandemic, but also like protests and everything like that that's been going on. But I knew, all right, there's a relationship that you can build on the internet that every type, I don't care, rapper, entertainer, The Rock, they all essentially have one issue when they either get canceled or they're not popping anymore. They don't have a relationship with their customer. And so the best thing you could do is have a newsletter. So the people who sign up for my newsletter, people who wanted to sign up with me. So I've got a few hundred people on that so far. Hopefully I hit 1,000 by August 1st. So I'm looking forward to that one. But the thing is, the people who sign up for the newsletter is people who have either seen my other work, like the videos I put online, they see me on social media, or they've heard the podcast. And so that has actually drawn people to my newsletter. And so what I'm doing is after I accumulate 1,000 people, I'm then going to, start doing a series of posts related to my own documentary. The reason being is because people are coming for me or the people I'm talking to first, and they need to develop a relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, once they develop a relationship with me, if they really, really enjoy what I've been putting out so far, the moment I say, hey, I got this documentary coming out, I would love for you to check it out. It goes from, okay, like a spam email or I'm wasting a bunch of money on Google AdWords to, hey, this is the guy I really like. I enjoy. I sign up for his newsletter as a paid member. I'm telling you, if I'm willing to pay money for this guy's newsletter, you should probably buy into his documentary.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do right now.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's like when people either have a podcast or YouTube channel or online business in some form or fashion, they eventually hear about the importance of an email list and the importance of a newsletter, but then make the mistake of like jumping in there and starting to spam people with buy this, buy this, buy that. And like these people literally just signed up for your newsletter yesterday. Like they don't actually know you or recognize the value that you provide yet. So kind of like making sure that they have that opportunity to like recognize you for the legitimate person that you are, and then being like, okay, in addition to all of this value that I have already provided you with, you know, I'm also working on this thing. So you kind of built up that clout, built up that relationship, versus like just being in their inbox always trying to sell them something, or not only always trying to sell them something, but like without having that like
No, I'm with you on that.
In regards to the documentary, I completely understand that pivot for your podcast, and I think that's a great idea, and also just speaks to the importance of like knowing when to switch it up content wise, because like everything's not always going to be the way you planned it out. But have you thought about like what that might look like going forward, or is it kind of just like we playing this by ear, because who knows how long we're gonna be in this?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I'm not gonna lie to you. Okay. I have a plan, but I'm like, part of me is like, you know what? Just let's see how it goes. Like, just be flexible. But the thing I want to do for the documentary is, if it was up to me, it would be out today. But part of me is like, you know, you gotta just trust the process and do what you need to do. The main thing is I want people to understand the history of gentrification in Atlanta, but more specifically, this is a story about Atlanta, and gentrification is a part of it. And so until you see it, you'll see what I'm talking about, because I think that with the older versions of the clips that you've seen, it's a lot about public housing. It's a lot about crime. It's a lot about people who talking about flipping houses. But one of the issues I think I've always had with the project until this new version is that let's tell the totality of how we got here, right? Because I think that's something that's going to draw you in more, because when it comes out, the way we're trying to release it now is going to be essentially like that same series of parts. But this notion of like, if you love Atlanta, if you have a relationship with Atlanta, this is something for you, because yes, gentrification is like the focus of the story, but there's so much on how we got here. And so that's been kind of like the strategy. So I'm not trying to be super tied into one thing. It's just like, I understand this is going to be like a long burn and a long process.
I think it's really dope that you use your background, both filmmaking and journalism, for like a social cause, and to build social awareness around an issue. If there were other people listening who had kind of that same goal, if they had to like choose one of those four aces, which one would you recommend in terms of like establishing a platform for them to distribute their content and connect with people?
Oh, that's a good one then. All right. So in the case of a social issue, right? I would say social media is number one. Because you could do a newsletter, and unless you already have a dedicated base of people who want to sign up and read what you say, then don't do one right now. You have a podcast, and you can do a good one, but unless you have any listeners, don't do one right now. In terms of social impact, you need to get you two accounts. You need an Instagram account. You need a Twitter account. You need to master the hashtags on both. And also particularly for Instagram, make sure you always have that location tag to let you know, hey, I'm in Atlanta, I'm in Stone Mountain. Utilize like that feature of it. With Instagram, I think important too, since Instagram doesn't have a limit on how much you can write, it's actually super important that you write the same level of terseness as you would on Twitter. So like, you know, you only got 280 characters. And I post on Instagram, you see some of my posts. The posts aren't actually that long. Like the text itself isn't that long, because Instagram is a photos first thing. So if you're an activist or a social person, the photo is going to weigh more on Instagram. The video does too, for sure. But the photo and the video mean more on Instagram. So your captions need to be audio based. And like when you do have text, it needs to basically either be like a screenshot of important information, or just like small commentary or small like contextual like related info. So and on Twitter, I will say this too. If you're on Twitter, make sure you use your hashtags. Make sure you're actually talking to people in dialogue, not like a spam person or like somebody trying to scam people. Like people do that a lot because that can get weird. But on Twitter in particular, I do this like at least once a week. I'll make a little mini Twitter thread, like 3 to 5 threads, kind of add them up.
Mhm.
I did one today about last week. This guy named Tom Cotton, he's a Republican senator from Arkansas. He basically was like, they need to send in the troops, like the actual U.S. troops to kill like the protesters. And then I did like a 5 or 6 thing tweet about it, but I got like a couple hundred retweets out of it and a few, probably like close to 500 or so like likes and all of that on that post.
Mhm.
But I do like a quick thread like that, kind of like twice a week. And that's a good way to get your name out there. If you're trying to do something social, you want to give people some context because people love to read. I think people forget that Twitter is for reading.
Mhm.
So if you want to be where the readers are.
So how can people learn more about you, follow you, keep up with what's going on with your content mediums?
So for me, I'm on everything. All the same stuff is at I am King Williams. So if you can put that in anything, you can just find me that way. So it's pretty straightforward at I am King Williams. If you want to listen to the podcast, it is on iTunes and SoundCloud only, and it's called The Neighborhood Watch. And it's also on YouTube.
Okay. I'll make sure to include the links also, so it'll be really easy for you guys to find. Thank you so much, King, for coming on the podcast, dropping your knowledge of Atlanta and filmmaking and journalism and all that good stuff with us.
Thank you for having me.